The billionaire's pen stopped a breath before touching paper when he saw the pregnant waitress nearly stumble beneath a tray of crystal glasses. In a room where a $40 million contract was seconds away from reshaping the skyline of Manhattan, Ryan Carter forgot the deal the investors and the empire built on his name. He saw only her. The Sterling room shimmered in gold light, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the city like a crown of steel and fire. Wealth moved through the air as easily as perfume quiet, and assured every laugh rehearsed, every handshake calculated. At 38, Ryan had mastered this world. His company's stock could surge or fall with a single sentence from his mouth. Investors leaned toward him when he spoke, not because he demanded attention, but because he commanded it. He had learned long ago that power was quiet, and that control was everything. Nothing in that room unsettled him, until Lily walked into it carrying someone else's future inside her body. Lily Carter moved carefully between tables, one hand steadying the silver tray, the other hovering protectively over the curve of her stomach. At 32, she looked thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair pulled back loosely, shadows carved beneath her eyes. The restaurant uniform hung on her frame as though it did not quite belong there. She had once worn silk dresses in penthouse kitchens, laughing while cooking pasta at midnight. Now she wore black flats and moved like each step required courage. When the manager barked at her to move faster, the words cracked through the music and scattered against marble walls. She did not protest. She lowered her eyes and nodded. That quiet obedience struck Ryan harder than any insult. His chair scraped violently across the polished floor as he stood. Conversation stalled. The investor beside him glanced up, confused pen hovering above signature lines that would seal a partnership worth $40 million. Ryan did not look back. He crossed the room with controlled strides, his heartbeat suddenly louder than the orchestra playing in the corner. "Lily," he said, and her name carried history the room could not hear. She froze. For a moment, time bent around them. The city lights flickered across her face, and in her eyes he saw not surprise but fear. She whispered his name as if it burned. He lowered his gaze to her stomach, the reality undeniable, the math impossible. Months earlier, she had stood in their kitchen with a suitcase and told him she had found someone else in Europe, someone who could give her a different life. He had signed the divorce papers because pride demanded it, because love without trust felt like suffocation. He had buried himself in work after that, building towers of success high enough to avoid looking down at the wreckage of what they once were. Now she stood in front of him, carrying a child, and his chest tightened with a question he was almost afraid to ask. "Is it mine?" The words were soft, but they sliced cleanly through the air. "No," she answered too quickly, her fingers gripping the tray until her knuckles whitened. He knew her rhythms. He knew when she told the truth and when she constructed a shield. The manager stepped closer, irritation sharpening his tone as he reminded her she was on duty. Ryan turned slowly toward him, and something in his expression made the man step back. The power in the room shifted without a sound. Guests who had dismissed Lily as background noise now watched the exchange with thin curiosity. They saw a pregnant waitress. They saw a CEO standing too close to her. They did not see the fracture running through both of them. Her heel caught the edge of a rug and the tray tilted. Crystals slid toward disaster. Ryan moved before thought could intervene, steadying the glasses with a firm hand. Their fingers brushed, and the contact sent a shock through him. She flinched, not from him, but from what might follow. In that instant, he understood something had never been as simple as betrayal. Lily was not ashamed. She was protecting something. Perhaps protecting him. Behind him, one of the investors cleared his throat, reminding him silently of the contract waiting for ink. Ryan did not turn. The empire could wait. The skyline could wait. For the first time in years, Ryan Carter felt control slip through his fingers, replaced by a fierce, unyielding need to uncover the truth standing before him in a waitress uniform. And as the room held its breath, the billionaire realized the most dangerous deal of his life was not on the table. It was written in the silence between them. The silence after her answer did not break gently. It fractured. Ryan held her gaze as if he could force the truth to surface by sheer will, while around them the low hum of wealth and entitlement slowly returned, uncertain and watchful. Lily adjusted the tray in her hands, her posture straightening in fragile defiance, but he saw the tremor running through her arms. She had always been strong in quiet ways, enduring storms without spectacle. Yet tonight the strain showed in the tight line of her mouth and the guarded way she angled her body, shielding her stomach from him, as though he were the threat. "Look at me," Ryan said, not loudly, but with a command that carried more weight than the manager's earlier bark. She hesitated before lifting her eyes, and when she did, something flickered there that did not align with her denial. It was not guilt. It was fear sharpened by responsibility. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "You expect me to believe you found someone else, moved on, and this is where you ended up." His tone was not mocking. It was wounded. Lily swallowed the movement, subtle but visible, and replied that life did not always turn out the way people planned. The sentence sounded rehearsed, like something she had repeated to herself often enough that it almost felt true. Behind them, Kevin Brooks, the restaurant manager, cleared his throat again, his patience thinning. He was in his mid-40s, carefully groomed and painfully aware of hierarchy. "Sir, with all due respect, she is scheduled for this section," he said, emphasizing the word scheduled, as if policy could neutralize tension. Ryan turned slowly toward him, the shift in his posture enough to quiet the nearby tables. "With all due respect," Ryan replied evenly, "you just threatened to fire a woman 8 months pregnant because she walked too slowly." The words landed heavy. A couple at the bar pretended to focus on their wine, yet their ears leaned in. Kevin forced a brittle smile, muttering something about standards and liability. Lily stiffened, embarrassed by the defense she had not asked for. The tray wobbled again as the weight of the moment pressed down. Ryan took it from her hands without asking and set it firmly on a nearby table. The crystal did not shatter this time, but something else nearly did. "You don't get to decide what I believe," he said quietly, returning his attention to her. "You left. You told me there was someone else. Now you're here and you expect me to accept a single word and walk away." The edge in his voice cut through years of buried resentment. Lily's jaw tightened. She whispered that he had signed the papers without fighting. He flinched as if struck. Around them, whispers rippled, investors exchanging glances at the unraveling scene beside a contract worth $40 million. "You think I didn't fight?" Ryan asked, the control in his tone thinning. "I signed because you looked at me like I was already gone." The confession slipped out before pride could restrain it. For a moment, Lily's composure cracked, revealing hurt that mirrored his own. She looked down at her stomach again, one hand resting there as if drawing strength from the life inside. "This isn't the place," she said softly. "Please." It was not a plea for mercy. It was a warning wrapped in vulnerability. Kevin shifted uneasily, sensing the attention shifting away from luxury and toward something raw and unpolished. Ryan became aware of the investors watching him, their patience thinning, their confidence dependent on his composure. He felt the weight of two worlds pressing against each other, the empire built on calculated decisions, and the fragile truth standing in front of him in a waitress uniform. He could return to the table, sign the deal, and reassert control. He could pretend this encounter was a distraction, nothing more. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was nearly a whisper. "If that child is mine, I will know," he said, "not as a threat, but as a promise. And if you are lying to protect someone, you need to understand something. I am not the man you left. I do not walk away from what is mine." The intensity in his words made Lily's breath hitch. For the first time that evening, doubt surfaced visibly across her face, a crack in the careful mask she wore. She glanced toward the kitchen doors as if calculating escape, then back at him. The room felt smaller, the chandeliers too bright, the marble too unforgiving. Kevin muttered about security but did not move. Power had shifted in the space between Ryan and Lily, quiet and undeniable. As the orchestra resumed playing thin and strained, Ryan realized this confrontation was no longer about pride or betrayal. It was about truth, buried beneath sacrifice. And whatever Lily was hiding, he could see it in her eyes now. She was not afraid of being exposed. She was afraid of what the truth would cost him. The memory of the night she left did not fade with time. It sharpened. Standing in the glittering restaurant with Lily's guarded eyes fixed on him, Ryan was dragged backward into a kitchen filled not with chandeliers and investors, but with silence thick enough to suffocate. It had been late autumn, then the city wind rattling the windows of their penthouse, while a single suitcase stood by the door like a verdict already delivered. Lily had not cried. That was what unsettled him most. She had spoken carefully as if each word had been rehearsed to minimize damage, telling him she had met someone abroad, someone who offered her a different future, a different life. He remembered the way his laughter had come out wrong, sharp and hollow, as if disbelief were the only shield he had left. "Tell me you're lying," he had said back then, gripping the marble counter until his knuckles blanched white. She had not met his eyes. She had stared somewhere just beyond his shoulder, as if focusing on him directly would weaken her resolve. "I'm not," she had replied, and her voice had cracked just enough to betray pain but not enough to stop her. That fracture had been his only warning sign, yet pride had drowned it out. At 36, already commanding a corporation valued in the billions, Ryan had believed control was the same thing as strength. He signed the divorce papers the next day. He told himself he was being decisive. He told himself that a man of power did not beg. But what he had truly wanted was for her to tear the documents apart, to fight for them, to scream that she was afraid rather than in love with someone else. Instead, she folded the papers neatly, thanked him in a whisper, and walked out with the suitcase rolling quietly behind her. The click of the closing door had echoed louder than any boardroom applause he had ever received. In that moment, something inside him hardened, not out of hatred, but out of humiliation so deep it demanded armor. In the months that followed, Ryan rebuilt himself with ruthless precision. He expanded his company into international markets, negotiated acquisitions worth hundreds of millions, and cultivated a reputation that left competitors hesitant to challenge him. Investors described him as unshakable. Journalists called him visionary. None of them knew that he worked until exhaustion every night because silence in the penthouse felt unbearable. He erased traces of her, carefully, not dramatically, removing photographs from walls, deleting shared playlists, donating clothes she had left behind. He convinced himself that betrayal was a lesson, and that love was an indulgence he could no longer afford. Yet even as his empire grew, a question lingered like a bruise he kept pressing to confirm it still hurt. Why had Lily, who once defended him fiercely in private moments, walked away without demanding anything in return? She had not asked for money. She had not fought for property. She had simply left. Pride translated her departure into infidelity, because that explanation hurt less than the possibility that something darker had driven her away. It was easier to imagine another man than to imagine danger he had failed to see. Now back in the Sterling room, watching her stand in a waitress uniform while carrying a child she claimed was not his, that buried question resurfaced with brutal clarity. Lily had never been dazzled by wealth. She had mocked the excess of corporate galas and preferred quiet evenings over publicity. If she had truly chosen another man for comfort or status, Why was she working double shifts in a restaurant, enduring public scolding from a manager who barely disguised his contempt? The narrative he had clung to began to fracture under its own weight. Lily, too, was haunted by that night. As she stood across from Ryan, she remembered how her hands had trembled when she packed the suitcase. How she had paused in the doorway, hoping he would demand the truth she could not safely give. She had waited for him to refuse the lie. When he signed the papers instead, her heart had splintered quietly. She had convinced herself it was necessary that distance would protect him from forces he underestimated. But protection had required silence, and silence had cost her everything. In the present, their eyes locked again, and the past pressed in like a tide neither could outrun. Ryan no longer saw a traitor. He saw contradictions. Lily no longer saw a man too proud to fight. She saw someone wounded by a story she had crafted to save him. The room around them glittered with superficial power, yet the real battle was invisible, rooted in choices made months ago under fluorescent kitchen light. And as investors shifted impatiently and the orchestra resumed its polished melody, Ryan realized the past had not ended when she closed that door. It had been waiting patient and relentless for the moment he would finally question the version of truth he had chosen to believe. Lily did not argue again. She turned abruptly, pushing through the swinging kitchen doors before the weight of his questions could pin her in place, and the sudden absence of her presence felt louder than any confrontation. Ryan hesitated for less than a second before following, ignoring the stunned expressions of investors left beside a contract worth $40 million. The polished elegance of the Sterling room dissolved into stainless steel counters, sharp orders from chefs, and the smell of heat and oil. Lily moved quickly despite her condition, one hand braced against her lower back, her breath uneven but determined. She burst through the back exit into the narrow alley behind the restaurant where the noise of Manhattan dulled into distant traffic and humming neon signs. The cold night air struck her face and she inhaled as if trying to steady something unraveling inside her. For a moment she leaned against the brick wall, eyes closed, palm pressed protectively over her stomach. She had calculated every possible scenario when she accepted this job, but not this one. Not Ryan standing in front of her again, seeing too much. The sound of the door swinging open behind her told her she had miscalculated badly. "Stop running," Ryan said, his voice controlled but edged with something raw. He did not touch her, yet he stepped close enough to block her path. In the dim alley light he saw details. The chandeliers had softened the exhaustion carved into her face, the faint chemical burns on her knuckles, the way she stood as if bracing against constant pain. This was not the life of a woman who had traded one billionaire for another. This was survival. "You don't get to disappear again," he added, quieter now, as if the words cost him something. "I didn't run," Lily replied, though her voice trembled. "I survived." The distinction hung between them like a challenge. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had faced hostile takeovers and courtroom battles without flinching. Yet this simple sentence unsettled him more than any competitor ever had. "Then tell me what I'm missing," he demanded. "Because nothing about this makes sense." His gaze dropped again to her stomach. "If that child isn't mine, then why do you look like you're protecting me from something?" Her composure cracked for a fraction of a second. Fear flickered openly now. Not fear of him, but fear of what he might do if he knew the full truth. "You need to let this go," she whispered. "For your own sake." The words were not dramatic. They were urgent. That urgency confirmed what his instincts had been screaming since he saw her inside. Ryan stepped back slightly, not retreating, but shifting. His expression cooled into something far more dangerous than anger. "You should know by now," he said evenly. "I don't let things go, especially when they involve you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Lily's eyes widened immediately. "Ryan, don't," she said, panic sharpening her tone. He ignored the plea and dialed a number from memory. When the line connected, his voice transformed into the precise authority that had built his empire. "Daniel," he said to his head of security, a former federal investigator who handled problems quietly and permanently, "I need everything on Lily Carter for the last 9 months. Where she's lived, who she's met, financial transfers, threats. I want the full picture." Lily grabbed his wrist, her fingers surprisingly strong despite their tremor. "You don't understand what you're stirring up," she warned. For the first time since their confrontation began, genuine alarm overtook her restraint. Ryan looked down at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. "Then help me understand," he replied softly. "Because if someone forced you into this, they made the wrong calculation." His voice hardened at the end, the shift subtle but unmistakable. When he ended the call, the alley felt smaller, charged with consequences neither of them could fully predict. Lily withdrew her hand slowly, realizing that the man standing before her was no longer the husband who signed papers in wounded pride. He was a strategist, patient and relentless, and he had just declared war without yet knowing the enemy. In the glow of the flickering security light, Ryan saw it clearly now. Lily was not hiding another man. She was hiding a threat, and whatever shadow had followed her into this alley, it had just stepped into his territory. The truth did not arrive gently. It struck like a blow to the chest. Ryan's phone vibrated less than 20 minutes after he left the alley, and by then he had not returned to the investors or the contract waiting on white linen upstairs. He stood alone in his car across from the restaurant, the city lights reflecting off the windshield like fractured stars when Daniel's voice came through the line, tight and focused. "She never left the country," Daniel said without preamble. "No Europe, no travel records, no secondary passport activity. She's been in New York the entire time." Ryan closed his eyes briefly, the first crack forming in the narrative he had clung to for months. "Keep going," he ordered. "She's been living in a studio apartment on the south side," Daniel continued. 200 square feet, heat inconsistent, paid month to month in cash transfers. And there's more. Repeated payments to 2 names you'll recognize, Marcus Hale and Jason Crow. The names landed heavy. Old rivals. Men who had attempted to sabotage Ryan's company 2 years earlier and disappeared after failing to gain leverage. The transfers increased over the last 8 months, Daniel added. There are encrypted messages, threat language, coercion indicators. The air inside the car felt suddenly thin. Marcus and Jason were not businessmen who played fairly. They were predators who exploited weaknesses. And Lily had been alone. What were they threatening? Ryan asked, though dread already pooled in his chest. "Framing you," Daniel replied. "Fabricated evidence tied to offshore accounts, corporate fraud. They were building a case designed to trigger a federal investigation. They told her if she didn't leave you and make it convincing, they would move forward." There was a pause before Daniel added quietly, "She paid them to stall." Ryan gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles blanched white the same way they had the night she left with a suitcase. Only now the memory rearranged itself under a harsher light. Lily's refusal to meet his eyes, the crack in her voice, the way she had not taken a cent from him. She had not chosen another man. She had chosen silence to protect him. "How long has this been going on?" he demanded. "Since before the divorce was finalized," Daniel answered. "And there's something else. Medical records flagged for high blood pressure. She's been working double shifts despite the pregnancy. No consistent insurance coverage." The words felt like accusations aimed directly at Ryan. He had been expanding international markets, celebrating quarterly profits, delivering keynote speeches about resilience, while the woman he once promised to protect was negotiating with wolves alone. In her apartment across the city, Lily sat on the edge of a narrow bed staring at her phone as unread messages from unknown numbers continued to appear. Marcus had warned her that Ryan would not stay uninvolved if he saw her. She had hoped humiliation would push him away, that pride would protect him the way silence once had. Instead, she had underestimated how much he had changed. The text on her screen was brief and sharp. "You told us he was out of your life. Fix this." Her hand trembled as she locked the phone and pressed it against her chest, feeling the steady movement of the child beneath her palm. Back in the car, Ryan's fury shifted from confusion to something colder and more controlled. He was no longer reacting as a wounded ex-husband. He was calculating as a strategist. "I want everything compiled," he told Daniel. "Bank trails, message records, leverage points. Quietly. And I want eyes on Hale and Crow immediately." His voice lowered further. They made a mistake. They thought she was alone. When he stepped out of the car, the city no longer looked indifferent. It looked like territory. The restaurant's glowing windows reflected his silhouette sharper now, purpose settling into his posture. For months he had believed Lily's departure was betrayal. Tonight he understood it had been sacrifice, and sacrifice, once revealed, demanded response. As he walked back toward the entrance, not for the contract but for her, one truth crystallized with brutal clarity. The men who had tried to destroy him through her had miscalculated the one variable they never accounted for. Ryan Carter did not forgive threats, and he never ignored a debt owed to someone who had suffered in his name. She collapsed before he could reach her. One moment, Lily was standing beneath the flickering alley light, pale but steady, and the next her knees buckled as if someone had cut invisible strings holding her upright. Ryan lunged forward, catching her before her body hit the cold pavement, her weight shockingly light in his arms. Her skin felt clammy, her breath uneven, and when she tried to focus on him, her vision seemed to slide past his face as though the world had tilted out of alignment. "My head," she whispered faintly. "It feels like it's splitting." Her fingers dug weakly into his jacket, the strength draining from them almost immediately. Ryan had negotiated hostile acquisitions without breaking composure, but the sight of her struggling to stay conscious dismantled every layer of control he possessed. He pressed his hand against her cheek, calling her name with an urgency he had not allowed himself in years. "Stay with me," he ordered, though the command trembled at the edges. She tried to sit up, stubborn even now. "You should go back inside," she murmured, as if the contract upstairs still mattered more than her body shutting down. "Don't make this worse." The words broke something inside him. He had mistaken her distance for indifference. He now saw it for what it was, protection carried to self-destruction. When her eyes fluttered and she swayed again, he did not hesitate. He pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services, his voice sharp and unyielding as he gave the address and described her symptoms. Pregnant, 8 months, severe headache, dizziness, possible preeclampsia. Within minutes, sirens sliced through the night air, red and blue lights painting the alley in frantic color. Lily clung weakly to his sleeve as paramedics assessed her blood pressure, their expressions tightening with concern. The numbers were dangerously high. One of them met Ryan's eyes with professional gravity. "We need to move now." He climbed into the ambulance without asking permission, ignoring the startled protest of a paramedic who began to explain visitor policies. Policies meant nothing. He would not let her face another crisis alone. Inside the hospital, fluorescent lights replaced chandeliers, and the scent of antiseptic erased any trace of luxury. Doctors moved quickly, voices clipped and efficient as they attached monitors and started intravenous lines. Ryan stood at the edge of the controlled chaos, hands clenched, watching machines translate her fragile state into blinking warnings. A physician approached him, face serious but steady. "Her blood pressure is critically elevated. This is severe preeclampsia. We may need to deliver the baby immediately." The words hit him harder than any corporate threat ever had. He signed consent forms with shaking hands, his signature less precise than the one he had withheld from a $40 million contract earlier that evening. Through the glass doors of the operating wing, he caught a glimpse of Lily on a gurney, her hair damp against her temples, her lips pale. Even in semi-consciousness, her hand rested protectively over her stomach. That instinct, constant and unwavering, nearly undid him. "I'm here," he whispered against the glass, though she could not hear him. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Hours compressed into suspended time as he paced the corridor, every passing second an accusation. He thought of the months she had worked double shifts negotiating with men who threatened him while he celebrated quarterly gains. He thought of the night she left, how he had mistaken sacrifice for betrayal. For the first time since building his empire, Ryan felt powerless in a way no competitor had ever managed to achieve. Money could not steady her pulse. Influence could not reduce her blood pressure. All he could do was wait. When the doors finally opened, a nurse stepped out, exhaustion and relief mingling on her face. "You have a son," she said softly. "He's early and small, but he's fighting." The words struck him with a force so profound he had to brace himself against the wall. A son. The confirmation he had demanded in anger now arrived wrapped in vulnerability. "And Lily?" he asked, voice rough. The nurse nodded. "She's stable for now. She lost a lot of strength, but she's holding on." Ryan exhaled slowly, something fierce and protective settling deep in his chest. He walked toward the neonatal unit where his son lay surrounded by wires and gentle machines no larger than a loaf of bread, yet breathing with stubborn determination. As he pressed his palm lightly against the incubator glass, one truth crystallized with unwavering clarity. Marcus Hale and Jason Crow had not merely threatened his company, they had endangered his family. And this time there would be no negotiations, no delayed responses. There would be consequences. By dawn, Ryan was no longer reacting. He was executing. The fear that had hollowed out his chest in the hospital corridor hardened into precision, the same ruthless clarity that had built his empire from a small startup into a multinational force. Only this time, the battlefield was not corporate strategy. It was personal. He stood outside the neonatal intensive care unit, watching his son's fragile chest rise and fall beneath transparent plastic, and every breath the child took felt like a silent accusation against the men who had forced Lily into isolation. Ryan pulled out his phone and called Daniel, his voice low and controlled. "Move," he said simply. Daniel had anticipated the shift. Within hours, a task force of private investigators and legal specialists was already tracing Marcus Hale's offshore accounts and Jason Crow's shell companies. What had once been whispered threats were now documented patterns of extortion and coercion. Bank transfers Lily had made under duress were cataloged and cross-referenced. Encrypted messages were decrypted. Daniel's team did not rush. They built cases the way surgeons worked carefully and without emotion. Ryan did not want spectacle. He wanted certainty. No back doors, he instructed. No quiet settlements. "I want them in court. Publicly." In a downtown office suite across the city, Marcus Hale received a call that drained the color from his face. The freeze on several of his accounts had gone into effect at dawn. Regulatory inquiries had surfaced simultaneously targeting transactions he had believed untouchable. Jason Crow, less composed, shouted into his phone at lawyers who suddenly sounded uncertain. For months, they had believed Lily was the weak link, a frightened woman who would remain silent to protect the man she loved. They had underestimated the moment when silence would end. Power had shifted and they felt it before they fully understood it. Back at the hospital, Lily drifted in and out of sleep, her body slowly stabilizing as medication steadied her blood pressure. When she finally opened her eyes fully, Ryan was seated beside her bed, his jacket folded neatly on the chair behind him, his tie loosened but his posture unwavering. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming. "You're still here," she murmured, confusion and relief mingling in her voice. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softer than she had seen in years. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "Not this time." She searched his face, trying to gauge what he knew. Guilt flickered through her. "I didn't want them to hurt you," she confessed weakly. The words cost her strength she barely possessed. Ryan's jaw tightened, but not in anger at her. "You should have let me fight," he replied, not accusing but resolute. "You don't protect someone by standing alone against wolves." She closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the truth in his tone. For months, she had believed distance was the only shield she could offer. Now she understood that isolation had nearly destroyed them both. A nurse entered with updates on their son, explaining that the baby was stable but would require careful monitoring for several weeks. Ryan listened intently, asking measured questions, absorbing every detail. He had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with less focus than he applied to the rhythm of his child's heartbeat. When the nurse left, he stood and extended his hand to Lily. "There's something you need to see," he said gently. He guided her slowly and carefully down the corridor to the viewing window of the neonatal unit. Their son lay beneath warm lights, impossibly small yet stubbornly alive. Lily's breath caught tears filling her eyes as she pressed her palm against the glass. Ryan stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt the steady presence of him. "His name is yours to choose," he told her. The statement was simple, but it carried weight. He was not reclaiming control. He was offering partnership. In that quiet hospital corridor, surrounded by the soft beeping of machines, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but alignment. That afternoon, news alerts began circulating discreetly through financial circles. Marcus Hale and Jason Crow were under federal investigation for extortion fraud and coercion. Warrants were executed before sunset. As officers escorted them into unmarked vehicles, cameras captured faces that no longer carried arrogance. Ryan did not watch the footage. He was seated beside Lily, holding her hand as their son's monitor emitted steady, reassuring rhythms. For the first time since she had walked out of their penthouse months earlier, he understood that power was not measured in stock value or influence. It was measured in who you stood beside when everything threatened to fall apart. And this time, he stood with her. A month later, the hospital no longer felt like a place of crisis. It became something quieter, almost sacred, a space where fragile beginnings were carefully protected. Ryan spent more time there than in his own office, trading boardroom meetings for the steady rhythm of machines that monitored his son's breathing. The world still moved around him. Deals still waited. Markets still shifted. But none of it carried the same urgency anymore. Behind the glass of the neonatal unit, his son fought each day with silent determination, and Ryan learned that strength did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered, fragile and persistent. Lily grew stronger, slowly, her recovery measured in small victories rather than dramatic change. A longer walk down the corridor, a steadier hand when she reached for the railing, the return of color to her face. She still carried exhaustion, but it no longer looked like defeat. It looked like healing. Ryan noticed every detail not as a distant observer, but as someone who refused to miss another moment. When she spoke, he listened. When she hesitated, he waited. The distance that had once defined them began to close, not through grand gestures, but through quiet consistency. One afternoon, Ryan stood beside Daniel in the hospital hallway, reviewing updates that would have once dominated headlines. The cases against Marcus Hale and Jason Crow were solid, their networks dismantled piece by piece. Assets frozen, charges filed, the kind of consequences Ryan had promised. Daniel spoke in measured tones, outlining the final steps, but Ryan's attention drifted back to the glass window where Lily stood watching their son. For the first time, victory did not feel like conquest. It felt like restoration. "Finish it," Ryan said simply, then ended the conversation. There was nothing more he needed from that world. Days later, he took Lily outside for the first time since the night everything changed. The air was cool, the city alive, but no longer overwhelming. Across the street, the building that had once housed the Sterling Room stood transformed. The harsh, polished sign was gone, replaced with warm lighting and simple lettering that read, "Lily's Table." Lily stared at it, confusion softening into disbelief. "You bought it," she said quietly. Ryan nodded and changed it. He did not elaborate, but the meaning was clear. No more humiliation, no more silent suffering hidden behind polished surfaces. She turned toward him, her eyes searching his face not for proof of wealth or power, but for intention. "Why my name?" she asked. Ryan held her gaze steady and unguarded. "Because you carried everything when I didn't even know there was a weight," he answered. "Because you chose to protect me when I didn't deserve it. And because I won't let you carry anything alone again." The words settled between them, not dramatic, but absolute. For the first time, Lily did not step back. She moved closer. Across the street, the new restaurant doors opened as staff prepared for the evening, unaware that its foundation was built on more than business. It was built on a second chance. Ryan reached for Lily's hand, his grip firm but gentle, and she let him hold it. No hesitation, no fear, just quiet acceptance. Behind them, the hospital stood as a reminder of what they had survived. Ahead of them, the city stretched wide, uncertain but full of possibility. And in that moment, Ryan Carter understood something no contract or empire had ever taught him. Power was not in what you could control. It was in what you chose to protect. Stories like this are not just about love or redemption. They are about perception and the dangerous ease with which we misjudge what we do not fully understand. From a deeper, almost psychological perspective, Ryan and Lily's journey reveals a truth. Many overlook silence is not always absence, and distance is not always betrayal. Sometimes the strongest acts of love are the ones hidden behind sacrifice, misunderstood until the cost becomes visible. Real power is not control over others, but responsibility for those who stand beside us when everything collapses. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something real, take a moment to like and subscribe so we can continue exploring stories that go beyond the surface. And before you leave, drop a short comment with just 2 words: true love.